Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our noon talk on the invasive smallmouth bass at Cultus Lake. We'll just give it a couple more minutes to let everyone join. A reminder to everyone to please stay muted and use the chat box to ask any of your questions. Okay, and while we are waiting, it looks like we have quite a few, most people are coming in. So while we are waiting, I'll just launch a quick question just to let us see where everyone is joining us from and why you're interested in this presentation today. Wonderful. So it looks like our numbers of attendees trickling in is calming down. I think we are good to get started. So if you would like to take a couple seconds, answer our quick polling question to help us determine who you are, why you're interested in this presentation today. That would give us an idea of what our audience is. And with that, I think I will end this polling. So it actually looks like most of the attendees today work at Cultus Lake. That's really great. I'm excited to be able to present today with Wendy and make sure that we all know what's going on and we're all sharing the same information with any of the visitors coming to Cultus Lake. All right, so. Great, so let's get started, hey? Welcome again, everyone, to this presentation on the invasive smallmouth bass at Cultus Lake. I am Kathy, I'm from the Fraser Valley Invasive Species Society, and I'm excited to talk to you guys today. Couple housekeeping items. Please, again, a reminder to please stay muted, use the chat box for any questions. And the chat box is set so that any questions do come directly to me in the interest of keeping our presentation today to our 1 hour time limit. And since we have already done the audience poll question, we're gonna keep moving right along. So a quick introduction about our organization. The Fraser Valley Invasive Species Society is located in the Fraser Valley. We operate within the boundaries of the Fraser Valley Regional District, and our mandate is to decrease the negative impacts of invasive species in the Fraser Valley. And if you would like to stay updated with what we have going on and any of our events, please feel free to follow us on our website. There's a newsletter you can sign up. You can email us with any questions, and you can follow us on social media at Fraser Valley Invasives on Facebook and Instagram. Hopefully when we're out there, either sampling lakes or doing weed pulls, we might be able to see some of you join us on our events. And a quick reminder, you are welcome to take a quick picture of this screen. All the information that will be shared today, most of it, will be summarized at this link at our website. So it's fviss.ca/smallmouthbass-cultist. And it's also a reminder for anyone using the lake or fishing at the lake that it is super important for you to report any invasive fish that you spot while you're using and recreating on the lake, and also report any violations to the wrap line. The number is listed there. And finally, the presentation today will be mostly talking about smallmouth bass. If you have any questions about fishing limits, other related species, please do search the BC freshwater fishing regulations to get those questions answered. And lastly, a reminder to everyone to help us stop aquatic invasive species by don't let it loose, and also please clean, drain, and dry your boats. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Wendy here is from the Thompson Rivers University, and she completed her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Ecology in 2015 from Dalhousie University. Since then, she worked in several different environmental sectors, including academia, consulting, and education, while migrating west to her current home in Kamloops. She's now in her second year of her Master of Science in Environmental Science program at Thompson Rivers University. When she's not cutting open fish, you can find Wendy gallivanting in the backcountry, rock climbing, mountain biking, and hugging trees. So right now, I will stop share and let Wendy start her presentation.
Awesome, thank you, Kathy. Okay, can you see my screen okay there?
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction, and thank you so much to all of you for joining me today. Kathy and I kind of thought of this presentation because I realized that, you know, there's so many people that work and live around Cultist, and I just wanted everyone to be on the same page in terms of what's going on with their project. So again, my name is Wendy, and my supervisor for this project is Dr. Brian Heisey. We're both at Thompson Rivers University, and welcome to the presentation, Smallmouth Bass, Invasions of Cultus Lake. So today I will give you a brief project background, so why we're doing this, the year one results. So we have done one field season, which was in 2020, and then talk to you because we are needing some volunteers for this season. And then of course, any questions and contact information at the end of the presentation. So to get started, in case you have not been to Cultus and fished or anywhere else in BC and fished for bass, I just thought I would give you a brief introduction to what they look like. So these bass are a medium-sized, deep-bodied fish with a slightly forked tail. Their coloration can range from golden brown to dark olive green, and they fade to white on their undersides. They often exhibit 8 to 15 patchy stripes, slightly darker than their color. The picture on your right, you can't see those stripes as well because they've been out of the water for a little bit, but in that little video, you could see that. On their dorsal fin, it's divided into a spiny frontal section and then a soft posterior section. And their jawline does not extend past their eye, and so this distinguishes them from the largemouth bass. And also in terms of size, so from last season, we caught bass ranging from 110 millimeters to 430 millimeters. And our largest bass we caught last season was almost 3 pounds. So they're getting pretty big in the lake. So bass are bad. Well, in Cultus Lake they are. So originally from Eastern Canada, bass were first introduced in 1901 in BC, but it wasn't until around 2018 that someone decided that Cultus needed more bass. And this was the first known location of smallmouth bass in the Lower Mainland. So what's the big deal? Why do we care about a few more fish in Cultus Lake? Well, in 2010, DFO released a report saying that lakes in the Chilliwack area had a suitability rating of 81 to 90% for smallmouth bass, meaning that just like the millions of tourists that come to Cultus Lake every year, the bass also love the lake. So on top of that, the bass are voracious carnivores, eating mostly insects and crayfish and other fish, but they have been known to also eat amphibians. They also have the ability to adapt to living in a wide variety of temperatures and habitats and can outcompete native species for both food and spawning grounds. And with their protective dorsal spine, They have few natural predators. So all in all, not so good for our 19 native species of fish in Cultus Lake. So I joined the project in September 2019, and at the time it was already partially formed with our government partners. And so myself and my supervisor, Dr. Brian Heisey, got to work. The project goal is to mitigate and document the impacts to species at risk from the invasive smallmouth bass in Cultus Lake. And so if you're not aware, these species at risk are the adorable Cultus Lake pygmy sculpin that you see in that bottom left image, and the distinct population of sockeye salmon that's in the bottom right image. These sockeye salmon exclusively spawn in Cultus Lake, so they're very important for the region. And from previous studies in the Pacific Northwest, we know that bass do prey both on sculpin and on sockeye salmon smolts. So we're very interested to see if that's also happening in Cultus Lake. To achieve this goal, we planned on using 3 main methods starting last summer in 2020. The first, diet analysis. So are they even eating the species at risk? And what other species could they be impacting? To answer this, we angle for bass, remove their stomachs, and then complete both a visual and DNA analysis on the stomach contents. Next is acoustic telemetry. So we want to understand their distribution in the lake and if their habitat is overlapping with those species at risk. So to do the acoustic telemetry, we surgically implant tags in the bass, and then we track them throughout the lake using receivers over a 2-year period. So this will give us a general idea of where they are. And the last is nest destruction. So bass create these large rock nests, almost 1 meter in diameter. And we plan on targeting and destroying the eggs and young of the year for suppression. So we chose this method based on previous eradication attempts of bass in other parts of Canada that showed that targeting only adults, so for example, through gill netting or through a derby, did not decrease the population and actually had the opposite effect. So since bass are cannibalistic on their young, they tend to some extent, control their own population. And without any adults, the population boomed. So that's why we're targeting the eggs and the young bass. And this seems to be the most effective method of suppression for the species. So how did our summer 2020 go? Well, we caught a lot of bass, which is great. And despite, some COVID-related setbacks and other stuff, myself, Brian, and my awesome field tech, Garrett, were able to push through with most of our field work. So with the help of our resident anglers, Nick and Pete, we caught and dissected 150 bass for stomachs and otolith analysis. And otoliths are the tiny ear bones that we use to age the fish. We placed 10 receivers that you can see in that second picture in the lake and tagged 30 bass with transmitters or tags to understand their distribution. We also completed some snorkel surveys and found over 60 bass nests and destroyed any that were still active. So unfortunately, last spring, the water was very murky and we weren't able to do as much nest destruction as we'd hoped. But I'm really hoping that this spring the water is nice and clear, and we plan on doing nest destruction and snorkel surveys pretty much every 2 weeks, starting end of April till mid-late June. So out of the 150 stomachs analyzed, 95 were sent to the lab for DNA analysis. And this is really exciting data for me because we just got this back a couple days ago. So I'm so excited to pass this on to everyone. But out of the 95 samples we sent to the lab, 94 out of the 95 actually had some traces of fish DNA in the stomachs, meaning that almost all the bass were in some sense piscivorous. And from this pie chart, you can see that they are eating sockeye salmon. So that 4% is actually exclusively the sockeye. And predominantly those bass were found in like May, June, so during the smolt outmigration. 25% of samples either had coast range or prickly sculpin in their stomachs. So with this DNA analysis, we were able to break down the sculpin into either coast range or prickly. But unfortunately, because the endangered sculpin, as you might remember, is called a pygmy sculpin, The DNA analysis was not able to distinguish between the coast range and the pygmy. So we know that 25% of stomachs had some sort of sculpin, so there is a good chance that there's pygmy in it. But to know for sure, hopefully this next year, with funding and timing permitting, we might be able to do a more in-depth RNA analysis to distinguish between those two species. Other major food categories included mayflies, chironomids, and crayfish. And then on the right, you can see a very distinguished, the top image is a sockeye salmon smolt, and the bottom one is a crayfish. So overall, this analysis shows us that the bass are feeding on the salmon, are most likely feeding on the pygmy sculpin, and are definitely consuming other food sources, such as lots of our insects, and possibly out-competing some of the native species for this food. And just as a side note, none of the bass we caught last year looked by any means malnourished. The ones that we even caught later in the season had looked almost overweight with thick layers of fat. So they're definitely good at competing for those food sources. So in addition, we also know from the otolith analysis, so that's the ear bones, that most of the bass that we caught, so we did 50 samples for the otoliths, were between ages 1 and 3. So since they are spring spawners, this means that the bass were probably put in the lake in either early 2017 or late 2016, sometime in there. So actually earlier than we thought than they were detected, but you know, they could have only put a few in. We really don't know what happened with the introduction. But what we do know is that from our analysis, most of the bass were between 1 and 3 years, with one of those 50 samples was a 4-year-old. So in terms of acoustic telemetry, I have yet to get deep into the analysis of this tag data. It's a 2-year study, and you know, each receiver has 25,000 to 50,000 data points on each one. So it'll be a big in-depth analysis, but I do have some preliminary results from this. So on the right, you'll see Cultus Lake, and those blue points represent our receivers. So the receivers in that picture on the right are the extremely expensive pieces of equipment that locate the tagged bass in the lake. So these receivers are placed about 8 to 10 meters down and are tied to a sunken float. We did have some issues last year with people dragging these receivers up onto the beach and tampering them. So if you see anyone doing this, please tell them to put them back. My number is also written on the float, so if you want to call me and let me know, that would be really great. At the end of the summer, we ended up with 22 alive and 8 dead. Most of the ones that died were caught by anglers, and a lot of them were reported to me. So all of the bass that are tagged have both an internal acoustic tag and an external spaghetti tag. And on the external spaghetti tag, it's a pink tag, and they say, please return to lake, as well as my phone number. So some anglers maybe didn't read that and they called me. So anyways, that's where the 8 dead have come out from. But in any case, we did find that the spawning area is mainly along Main Beach and up into Swelter Creek. This was confirmed from our snorkel surveys as well. So this is a big concern though, because of the connectivity between Swelter Creek and the Fraser River. So bass, we know, can thrive in both lake and river ecosystems, and we do not want them getting further up into the system. They can have, even more devastating effects on other water bodies. So another notable finding was that as the ambient or the outside temperature reached about 30 degrees in the summer, the bass seemed to then disperse all throughout the lake. So basically, especially later in the summer, they're everywhere in the lake. So this was the first summer of a 2-year study. And so again, we'll continue to monitor this over the next summer, and then download our data probably in the fall of this year, and be able to give a much better overview of exactly the activity of the bass throughout both the summer and winter, which will be very interesting. As for this upcoming summer, we've also bought 8 more tags that we'll be implanting into the bass, and this will increase our sample size for the project. Okay, so that was kind of an overview of what we've been doing on the project this last year and some initial results. So are there any questions so far?
Great. We've had one question so far from Tyler. He says, I didn't see on the diet analysis, are the bass eating resident northern pike minnow? What % of their diet?
So I think yes, so this is a families level diagram, but from the actual data, they're really not eating. I think it was only found in 2 stomachs that there was evidence of pike minnow. So I expected that there would be more pike minnow, but way more salmon than those 2 instances of pike minnow. But yeah, great question.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I'm curious if like what the nests look like.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a picture on here actually, but they're about, yeah, they're 1 meter wide and they're very distinct. So if you're ever swimming between Sweltzer and the marina, it's just a complete rocky bottom. It's devoid of vegetation, and that's perfect for the for the bass. And the rocks that they choose, they clean them off perfectly. And so all the other rocks around it will be kind of mossy, but these ones are perfectly cleaned off and like very circular. And they all different sizes of pebbles. And they're about 1 to 2 meters deep, so pretty shallow. And we actually also found that they really like building them right underneath structures. So for example, all the buoys there's tons of buoys and Cultists that the boats are tied up to. They'll build them right at the bottom of that. And we think it's because as the buoy chain moves with the wind or waves, it cleans off the rocks for them. So they might be there, but yeah, they're very distinctive if you're swimming around. And also the males are extremely territorial. And so if you try and mess with them as we do, they often come at you and are up in your face. Yeah.
Great. I have another question in the chat box. How many offspring do you think a single female is producing in Cultus Lake? What would you estimate the population to be this summer?
Great questions. And both of those we're hoping to answer this summer. So we're adding some more things that we're doing this summer. One is we are going to be removing the ovaries. And so we'll be doing an egg count for the bass. And then second, when we destroy the bass nest, the fry, they're tiny little black guys and they stay in a big clump. And so we're actually going to be dip netting for those fry and counting them to see how many there are. So we don't know that quite yet. But hopefully this summer we'll get some more of that data. And then in terms of your population question, so that's coming up in my slides, but we're going to be running a mark recapture program this summer. So we'll be tagging the bass and then asking the public to report all of their catches to us, so that will give us a better idea once we plug that into a model of how many bass there are. Because really we don't know. We caught 150 last summer over, I don't know, maybe 20 days, but we had lots of reports from other people of catching them as well. So there's definitely a lot. Yeah.
Another question, some general questions. It's a 2-parter. What can be done to prevent or reduce the downstream dispersal of bass into Sweltzer Creek and downstream into the Chilliwack and Fraser? So sorry, that's one question.
The researchers at the Cultus Lake lab, they do have a fish fence up that they use to count. It's up April to June, I believe. And Garrett, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. But they have that fish fence up that they use to count any out-migrating smolt. And so that will actually catch the bass right now if they see any right there. As for the rest of the year, yeah, it is kind of an issue. Like this is the very beginning of researching this project, but who knows, maybe it could mean putting some other barrier up there. But right now it is possible for them to get up there, unfortunately, into the other rivers.
Great. Are there any other questions anyone would like to put into the chat box? We'll give it a couple more seconds for some of us who are slow typers. Oh, There you go. Would milfoil vegetation removal improve bass habitat?
That's a great question. Kind of a conflicting interest there, hey? Honestly, I can't give you an answer to that. We have not been doing any research there, but I am aware of the sections that they're removing the milfoil. So maybe that's something I can look into this summer and see. Yeah, great question.
Great. I don't see any further questions. If you do have any further questions while Wendy is moving on to the second part, please feel free to type it in. And if there is time at the end, we will circle back to it.
Awesome. So this is all based on this upcoming summer. So we need your help for two things. So the first is the Recapture program. And this I'll be talking more on the next slide. But the second part of this is to spread the word, because, you know, we've been in touch with the Cultus Lake community itself, the residents and the class and those group. But I know that, you know, Cultus gets so many visitors every year. So we will be posting this information on other sites in terms of what we'd like the public to be doing with the bass. But as much as I think word of mouth is one of the best ways to get this around. So yeah, spread the word, talk to people. We'll also be posting, there's some signage up at Cultus right now, but we're going to be adding a bit more. We've got some A-frame signs to put up at the really popular fishing areas and also at the fishing docks. So hopefully that will help. But anything that you can help with in terms of letting people know is really, really great. So in terms of the Recapture program, so basically what's going to happen is for the next month or so, I'll be going out quite a bit and tagging a whole bunch of bass. So I'll be angling with Nick and Pete again. Thank you for helping me for the bass. And we'll see this tag in the bottom right of the picture. We'll be putting those types of tags just below the dorsal spine. So you can see in that bass where the tag will be approximately. It should be very visible for anglers. And then, so starting June 19th, kind of after that Father's Day long weekend, before that Father's Day long weekend, we'll end our tagging process because I figure lots of people are usually out. I don't think the Derby's running this year, but usually people are out that weekend because it's BC fishing weekend, that sort of thing. And so we would love your help in recording some information. So all you need to do is, go out fishing and take down information. So these are the two main things you need to remember. If you catch a bass with a green tag or that's untagged, you can record this information and kill it up to I think it's 20 bass per day limit. But if you catch a bass that's pink tagged, please put it back in the water immediately. You don't need to record any information. If it's pink tag, just put it back. So that's kind of the main message that we're trying to get out. And so in terms of the green tag, so the things you need to record are the date, the number of hours spent fishing. This will help us to get population data and the catch per unit effort. So the tag number, which as you can see on this tag in the bottom right, is this, it'll be a 3-digit number in the bottom right, not my phone number. Some people have reported that to me instead. And the length in millimeters. So, and I mean, if you don't have a ruler or whatever with you, that's fine. We are on our A-frames that we're hopefully going to be putting up around the lake on our signage. There will be a measuring board on the back of them. So, you know, if you catch a bunch of bass, you can just bring them over there and measure them. And also, I don't expect you to remember all this right now. And so also on the Fraser Valley Invasives website with the smallmouth bass page, there is a form you can download. And so if you want to download this form, then it has all the categories you need to input information. And just so you know, there's no commitment to this. So you don't need to, you know, commit every day of the week or once a week or anything. This is just, if you're ever out fishing, please send us some information kind of thing. And again, we're hoping to spread this word so that we can get really good population data on the bass. And then once you've written down that information and you'd like to submit it, here is my email. So it's wmargetts@tru.ca. And so yeah, please feel free to reach out at any time as well if you have questions, or if you would like to volunteer further with the project, you know, whether it's with engagement or something like that. I love to hear from you. I think the most valuable information we get is from people that actually live at Cultist and can give us that really insider knowledge about what's going on. So yeah, if you can email me those Mercury Recapture forms. And then again, the forms, there's the website right there at the bottom. Or if you'd like to volunteer any further with the project. So with that, and these are all our partners and funders, which we have many of, and we're very grateful for. With that, I think I am done. If there are any further questions.
Yeah, so we have 2 more questions in the chat box. Oh, 3 more. That's great. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. So a question from Chuck. I think we can only answer part of this, or maybe not even. I've heard that there are bass in Deer Lake in Burnaby. Do you know the source of those fish from Cultus, the smallmouth bass in Cultus, I believe? And do you know if there is any control work happening in, I believe, the Deer Lake? I just checked the bulletin and it doesn't say anything about smallmouth bass in Deer Lake. It could be largemouth bass, but we would have to confirm with the province to let you know whether or not there's smallmouth bass in Deer Lake. And I guess, Wendy, do you know the source of the fish into Cultus?
No, that's the big question. There are quite a few like established populations, both in Washington, Vancouver Island, like the Beaver Lake system. So there's a few established. And one of the things Brian and I talked about figuring out when I started this project, oh, if we could do some isotope analysis to see where they came from, but it's already a big project. So it would be really cool to find that out, but we can't tell where they're from right now.
Great. And how deep do they spawn? How confident are you nest destruction will be successful? If a few nests remain each year, natural mortality for surviving young should be low, or egg to recruit survival will be high. It seems like you would have to destroy all the nests for mechanical removal to be effective. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely our goals with this project are, one, kind of exploratory, so they're to see if this will work at all, but also we don't plan on eradicating the bass, unfortunately. Invasive fish are so difficult to get rid of, you know, and we're not going to zap the lake with any chemicals due to its many reasons. And so we don't plan on eradicating the bass. So that's just not feasible for this project. So the question here is nest destruction feasible in this lake? First off, does it have any effects? So does it suppress the population at all? Even if we're not getting rid of them totally, maybe if you do it for a couple of years, maybe then the population will be kept in check, so there'll be less bass. So that's kind of more where we're going with our research question.
Great. There's a question here hoping to clarify the mark recapture slide. Are you advocating that anglers kill green tagged and untagged bass? And you said 20 per day, regardless if they are going to consume their catch?
Yes, so I believe on the BC Regulations website, it says 20 per day. You can double check that to make sure. And yes, we are advocating, so if you catch a green or untagged bass, you don't have to kill it. I'm not saying you have to kill it, but if you want to, you can kill those ones, but just not the pink tagged bass.
Great. And just to address a couple questions that are very similar. is about the 20 per day limit on the bass and why it's a 20 per day limit. I don't believe Wendy would be able to speak to why this limit is put in place. So I do recommend, if you have questions about why a limit exists and the reasoning behind that, please reach out to the ministry for further information. Whether or not you need a license to fish, I do want to again redirect folks with those kinds of questions to the freshwater fishing regulations, which I have just, I am dropping a link in the chat box for everyone right now. And it looks like we have a question about Cultus sockeye. Are already struggling. Do you believe the bass could completely destroy the entire Cultus sockeye run?
Hopefully not. But we don't have that data yet. We have, like I said, some preliminary data from last spring where we saw that 4% of the stomachs analyzed had sockeye in them. But we are planning on doing another. We're planning on getting out there earlier this year to really capture the whole image of how many sockeye they're eating. And the lab at Cultus has really good data on how many are coming through. So after the spring, we'll be able to compare our stomach data from that spring migration with the Cultus Lake Labs data on how many went through and kind of see what percentage they are eating. Yeah, that's one of our main questions for this summer. So hopefully they're not totally decimating the population, but who knows?
Great. And last one is, I hear there's bass in Pitt Marsh. Is there any control and research work being done elsewhere in the Fraser Valley? To my knowledge, and Wendy, you might know further information as well, is that Cultus Lake is currently the only lake with smallmouth bass. Often largemouth bass does get confused for smallmouth bass, so that could be a bit of confusion there. But I believe currently only Cultus has smallmouth bass, and that's the only place right now with this type of research and control work being done.
In the lower mainland, yeah. So there's definitely largemouth in the Pitt Marsh, but to our knowledge right now, the only lake with smallmouth is Cultus in the lower mainland area. Great.
All right. So it looks like the chat box has quieted down. This pretty much concludes our presentation. If there are any other further questions, I see a comment from Rodney. Would you like to type in your question into the box?
Yeah, I was gonna ask by audio. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, I was actually just gonna provide some information. So regarding angling for bass, you do need a freshwater fishing license for them to do it. And the limit is 20 fish per day. So with there is a bit of a dilemma for the anglers because the regulation actually requires you to consume the fish if you do decide to keep them and not wasting fish. And there isn't a separate regulations when it comes to invasive species that you can't. So it really comes down to the anglers, like what Wendy's saying, whether they decide to keep them or not. So my question is, so are you encouraging anglers to keep any specimens at any particular size? Because you mentioned that by keeping the larger fish, it does have an opposite effect on the population because the larger fish are consuming the smaller specimens. I guess my other question was that, have you seen any evidence of fish traveling down the creek towards the Veda River so far? And lastly, I was just going to mention that, yes, as far as I know, smallmouth bass population has only been found in Cultus, whereas largemouth is actually pretty widespread in Region 2, right across the lower Fraser tributaries. We found them in Nickerman Slough, in the State River, caught them all the way down in the tidal portion of the Fraser River, actually, down all the way down to Steveston at times. So yeah, so that's all the information I have. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that information, Rod. That's really helpful. So yeah, in regards to your first question about catching the bass. So like I said before, yes, there can be an overcompensation effect if you kill too many of the large adults. Right now, we're not putting a limit on what sizes you can catch for our project specifically. We just figure in the reports we've read from other articles, when that comes into effect, it's more when the management researchers are, gill netting and electrofishing like thousands or hundreds of fish at a time in really, really large numbers of the adults. So I'm assuming in terms of just angling, I don't think that we'll get the same kind of impact. I could be wrong with that. We'll find out. That was the first part. Oh, and the second part of your question in terms of the river, if we've caught any in the river. So the Cultus Lake lab, they did find a few just in front of their barrier. So they have, and we did find 2 nests, just, the bridge at Swelter, just like a little bit up from there. We haven't snorkeled too far past there, but we found 2 nests just in Swelter there. And then they did find a couple bass last year at the fence. So there is a little bit of evidence. We were considering putting a receiver kind of farther up Swelter Creek, which would then tell us if any of the tagged bass were passing it. So that's one possibility from this summer that we might do. So hopefully this summer, yeah, we'll get some more information on if they are traveling up and into the Vetter. But also angler reports really help. So if anybody is angling, well, obviously you can't angle in Swelter Creek, but if anybody is angling anywhere else on those river systems and find bass, please report it, because that's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you and I will chat once your tagging starts at the lake in a few weeks from now. So
sure, absolutely.
thank you.
Great. And I think that might be it. I know that if you have any questions about nests or if you need a review of this information, it is on our website. And I believe Wendy will be putting up signs on the bulletin boards again this year to make sure that any visitors who are visiting the lake and angling and not on this webinar will be able to also get this information. So,
oh, it does look like
Kathy,
Dave, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did send something on chat. Will there be more clear signs not to fish on Swelter Creek? The signs are rather indirect and unclear, even for residents. We look at them and like, how do people know the boundaries on here? They're kind of official looking signs, but they're not specific to Swelter. And it would be pretty easy. And I just mentioned that we talked about, it was brought up at our last class meeting about the clarity of the signage. And also the fishers I noticed were starting to fish on Swelter last week. That's the first I've noticed.
Yeah, so that signage, it's not under my management, unfortunately, but I am in contact with some of the people that might be able to pass that along in terms of the fishing regulations of Swelter. So I can definitely pass that message along to our partners, whether I'm not quite sure if it's DFO signage or if it's park signage, but whoever it is, I can definitely pass that information along and yeah, get them involved.
I think it's DFO signage, I believe, not park signage. Put that way, it's not park signage, I'm pretty sure.
Right. Okay, yeah, I'll pass that along for sure.
Perfect. Okay, great. No more from the chat box? Still waiting? All right. I think we can.
Yeah, I also have a question about, should we say I was, snorkeling around in May, like I usually do, and I see a nest. Should I destroy it or destroy it and tell you, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested and you want to do some snorkeling, like why don't you reach out to me and we can get in contact, and I can even send you a form that I use when I just like noting them down. But yeah, the more distraction, the better. So that would be great.
Great, thanks.
All right, cool. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up now. All right. Well, thank you, Wendy, for coming online and sharing her research with us. We really appreciate it. And if anyone needs any further information, please contact Wendy. Her contact information is on our website, as well as if you go on the freshwater fishing regulations, there is a additional document regarding the smallmouth bass at Cultus Lake. So please be in touch. Please do your part and prevent any further spreading of invasive fish. And I hope if any other questions come up, please get in touch.
Sorry, I had one more just note. That email that I have up there, it is just currently getting registered with TRU. So I probably won't receive emails until tomorrow or the next day. So hold off on emailing me for 2 more days while that gets set up with TRU. Thanks.
Perfect. All right. And a reminder for everyone else, this webinar is being recorded, so it will be uploaded online. So if you do want to share this with a fellow angler or another user of the lake, please feel free to do so. It will be up on our website and also shared to our social media. And with that, I would like to wish everyone a really great day. Thank you again for joining us and answering such great questions. And I hope you enjoy the sun today. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy and Kathy.